The water came without warning, roaring down from the mountains like an unleashed demon, swallowing everything Brennan had ever known in a matter of hours. She stood on the ridge overlooking what used to be her family's homestead, her dress soaked through, her dark hair plastered to her face, watching the muddy torrent consume the last standing wall of the house where she had been born 22 years ago. The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and when the river finally broke its banks that morning in September of 1878, it took her parents' graves. The barn her father had built with his own hands, the garden her mother had tended for 15 years, and every single possession she owned except for the clothes on her back and the locket around her neck. Rebecca had been in town when it happened, delivering eggs to the general store in Kingston, a small settlement in the Wyoming Territory that sat at the junction of 2 rivers. She had seen the water rising as she rode back, had urged her horse faster, but by the time she crested the hill overlooking her valley, there was nothing left to save. Her horse had bolted when the ground started shaking from the force of the flood, and she had scrambled up the muddy slope just in time to avoid being swept away herself. Now she stood alone in the driving rain, shivering despite the fact that it was not yet truly cold, wondering what on earth she was going to do. Her parents had died the previous winter from pneumonia, leaving her to run the small ranch by herself. She had been managing, barely, but now even that hard-won survival was gone. She had no family, no close friends, and exactly 12 cents in her pocket. The rain intensified, and Rebecca knew she could not stay on the ridge much longer. The water was still rising, and the ground beneath her feet was turning to mud. She needed to get back to town, needed to find shelter before nightfall. But the thought of walking into Kingston and begging for charity made her stomach turn. She had always been proud, had always taken care of herself, and the idea of becoming dependent on the pity of others felt worse than standing in the rain. Still, she was not foolish enough to die of stubbornness. Rebecca turned away from the ruins of her home and started walking toward town, her boots squelching in the mud with every step. The road was mostly underwater, so she had to pick her way through the brush on higher ground, climbing over fallen trees and wading through streams that had not existed that morning. It took her nearly 3 hours to cover the 5 miles to Kingston, and by the time she reached the outskirts, she was exhausted, freezing, and so covered in mud that she barely looked human. The town itself had not escaped the flooding. The main street was ankle-deep in water, and several of the buildings near the river had been damaged or destroyed completely. People were working frantically to move goods and livestock to higher ground, shouting to each other over the roar of the water and the drumming of the rain. Rebecca stood at the edge of town, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. She did not know where to go or who to ask for help. The general store where she sold her eggs was still standing, but she could see through the window that the owner, Mr. Patterson, was busy trying to save his inventory from the rising water. The boarding house where she sometimes took tea with the owner's wife looked intact, but she knew Mrs. Henderson barely made ends meet as it was and could not afford to take in a charity case. She was still standing there, paralyzed by uncertainty, when a horse and rider came splashing down the street toward her. The rider was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a long oilskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat that kept most of the rain off his face. He pulled up short when he saw her, and even through the downpour, she could see his eyes widen with concern. "Madam, are you all right?" He called out, his voice deep and rough but not unkind. Rebecca opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. She was shaking too hard, her teeth chattering so violently that she could not form a coherent sentence. She managed a small shake of her head, and that seemed to be enough. The man dismounted in one smooth motion and was at her side in 3 long strides. Up close, she could see that he was probably in his late 20s, with strong features and dark eyes that held genuine worry. There was something solid and dependable about him, something that made her want to trust him even though she had never seen him before in her life. "You are freezing," he said, stating the obvious. "Where do you live? I will take you home." "Gone," Rebecca managed to get out through her chattering teeth. "The flood took it. Everything." Something shifted in the man's expression, a flash of understanding and sympathy that looked almost painful. He did not waste time with useless platitudes or questions. Instead, he shrugged off his oilskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then took her arm in a firm but gentle grip. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded, though she was not entirely sure it was true. He helped her over to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that stood patiently in the rain, and lifted her into the saddle with surprising ease. Then he swung up behind her, one arm coming around her waist to steady her, and turned the horse away from town. "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked, finding her voice at last. "My place," he said simply. "It is not fancy, but it is dry and warm, and you need both of those things right now." She knew she should probably protest, should probably insist on staying in town where it was proper, but she was too tired and too cold to care about propriety. She leaned back against his solid warmth and let him take her wherever he was going. They rode for about 20 minutes, heading east away from the rivers toward higher ground. The rain began to ease up slightly, though the sky remained dark and threatening. Finally, they crested a small rise, and Rebecca saw a ranch house nestled in a valley below, surrounded by several outbuildings and a sturdy-looking barn. The house was modest but well built, with a covered porch that wrapped around the front and smoke rising from the chimney. The man guided the horse down the slope and right up to the porch, then dismounted and helped Rebecca down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground, but he caught her easily and half carried her up the steps and through the front door. The inside of the house was warm and blessedly dry. There was a fire burning in a large stone fireplace, and the main room was furnished simply but comfortably with handmade furniture and colorful rugs. The man guided her to a chair near the fire and gently pushed her into it, then disappeared through a doorway. He returned a moment later with a stack of blankets and a towel. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, his tone matter of fact. "I will turn my back, and you can wrap yourself in these blankets. There is a bedroom through that door where you can have some privacy once you are decent." Rebecca stared at him for a moment, her exhausted brain struggling to process everything that was happening. He seemed to understand her confusion because he gave her a small, reassuring smile. "My name is Harrison Owens," he said. "I run this ranch with my brother, though he is up in Montana right now buying cattle. You are safe here, I promise you that. I just want to help." There was something in his voice, something honest and sincere, that made Rebecca believe him. She nodded slowly, and he turned his back as promised, moving to the other side of the room to give her privacy. With shaking fingers, she managed to peel off her wet dress and undergarments, then wrapped herself in the warm, soft blankets he had provided. They smelled like soap and wood smoke and something else that was probably just him. "I am decent," she said quietly. Harrison turned back around, and for a moment, their eyes met across the room. There was something in his gaze that made Rebecca's breath catch, something that had nothing to do with the cold or the exhaustion. Then he looked away and cleared his throat. "The bedroom is through there," he said, pointing to the door he had mentioned earlier. "There is a bed and more blankets if you need them. I will heat up some soup and bring it to you." "You do not have to do all this," Rebecca said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I should not impose on you like this." "You are not imposing," Harrison said firmly. "Now go get in that bed before you collapse. We can talk about everything else after you have eaten and rested." Rebecca did not have the energy to argue. She stood on shaky legs and made her way to the bedroom, which turned out to be neat and spare, with a large bed covered in a thick quilt and a small dresser against one wall. She crawled into the bed, blankets and all, and was asleep before her head fully hit the pillow. She woke to the smell of food and the sound of rain still drumming on the roof. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her chest. Then it all came flooding back: the destruction of her home, the long walk to town, and the stranger who had brought her here. Harrison Owens. He had said his name was. Rebecca sat up slowly, her body aching from the previous day's ordeal. There was a tray on the small table beside the bed holding a bowl of soup, a hunk of bread, and a steaming cup of what smelled like coffee. There was also a pile of neatly folded clothes, men's clothes obviously, but clean and dry. A note sat on top of the clothes, written in neat, strong handwriting. "These will be too big, but they are better than nothing. Take your time. No rush." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness. She could not remember the last time someone had taken care of her like this, not since her mother had died. She ate the soup, which was surprisingly good, thick with vegetables and chunks of beef, and drank the coffee, which was strong and hot and exactly what she needed. Then she put on the clothes he had left, a flannel shirt that hung nearly to her knees and a pair of trousers that she had to roll up several times and cinch tight with a piece of rope she found in the dresser drawer. She looked ridiculous, but she was warm and dry, and at the moment, that was all that mattered. Taking a deep breath, she opened the bedroom door and stepped back into the main room. Harrison was sitting at a rough-hewn table near the fire, working on what looked like a piece of leather tack. He looked up when she entered, and a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth when he saw her outfit. "I look absurd," Rebecca said, feeling her cheeks heat. "You look alive," Harrison said, setting down his work. "That is all that matters. How do you feel?" "Better," she admitted, moving closer to the fire. "Thank you for everything. The food, the clothes, the bed. I do not know what I would have done if you had not found me." "You would have figured something out," Harrison said with quiet confidence. "You have that look about you, like a survivor." Rebecca was not sure what to say to that, so she stayed silent, looking around the room with more attention than she had been capable of the night before. It was a comfortable space, lived in but tidy, with books on a shelf near the fireplace and a few simple decorations that suggested someone actually cared about making it a home rather than just a place to sleep. "How bad was it?" Harrison asked quietly. "Your place, I mean." "Gone," Rebecca said, the word coming out flat and hard. "Everything. The house, the barn, the garden, even my parents' graves. There is nothing left but mud and wreckage." "I am sorry," Harrison said, and she could tell he meant it. "That is a hard thing to lose." "It was all I had," Rebecca said, her voice threatening to break. She swallowed hard, forcing the tears back. She had not cried yet, and she was not going to start now. "I have been running that place by myself since my parents died last winter. It was not much, but it was mine. And now it is just gone, like it never existed at all." Harrison was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. Then he stood and crossed to where she stood by the fire, stopping close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "It did exist," he said firmly, "and it mattered. And so do you. Do not forget that." Rebecca looked up at him, startled by the intensity in his voice. He was looking at her like she was something valuable, something worth caring about, and it made her heart do a strange little flip in her chest. I do not even know what I am going to do, she said quietly. I have nowhere to go, no way to rebuild. I have 12 cents to my name and the clothes on my back, except these are not even mine, they are yours. Then they are yours now, Harrison said simply. And so is this. What? Rebecca asked, confused. This, Harrison said, gesturing around the room. This house, this ranch, you need a place to stay and I have one. You are welcome to it for as long as you need. I cannot just move in with you, Rebecca protested. That would be completely inappropriate. People would talk. Let them talk, Harrison said with a shrug. I have a spare room which you are already using. You can stay there, help out around the ranch if you want to feel like you are earning your keep, and we will figure out the rest as we go. It is not charity, it is practical. I need help running this place with my brother gone, and you need a roof over your head. Seems like a fair arrangement to me. Rebecca stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. He looked serious, his expression open and honest and completely without guile. She wanted to say yes so badly it hurt, but years of trying to be proper and respectable held her back. I do not want to ruin your reputation, she said finally. My reputation can handle it, Harrison said dryly. Besides, like I said, my brother will be back in a month or so, and then you will have a proper chaperone if that makes you feel better. But honestly, Rebecca, I am more worried about you freezing or starving than I am about what the old biddies in town might say. The way he said her name, soft and careful, made something warm bloom in her chest. She realized that she wanted to stay, wanted to accept his offer, not just because she had no other options, but because there was something about this man that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in a very long time. All right, she said quietly. But only temporarily, until I figure out what I am going to do, and I will work for my keep. I am not a freeloader. Deal, Harrison said, and the smile he gave her was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Over the next few days, Rebecca settled into life at the ranch with surprising ease. The rain finally stopped, and the floodwaters began to recede, leaving behind a landscape transformed by mud and destruction. Harrison took her back to her property once, so she could see if there was anything worth salvaging, but there was nothing. The house had been completely swept away, the barn was a pile of broken timber, and even the fences were gone. She had stood there for a long moment, mourning the loss, and then turned away and did not look back. She threw herself into work, determined to earn her place at the ranch. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes and tack, tended the vegetable garden that had somehow survived the flood because it was on higher ground, and helped Harrison with the livestock. He had about 50 head of cattle, a dozen horses, some chickens, and 2 milk cows, and there was always something that needed doing. Harrison was a good teacher, patient and thorough, and he seemed to genuinely appreciate her help. He never made her feel like a burden or a charity case, and he never once tried to take advantage of their situation. He was respectful and kind, and as the days turned into weeks, Rebecca found herself looking forward to their time together. They fell into an easy routine. They would rise before dawn and work through the morning, then share a simple lunch before tackling the afternoon chores. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Harrison would read aloud from his collection of books while Rebecca worked on mending or knitting. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories about their lives and their dreams, and Rebecca found herself opening up to him in ways she had never expected. She learned that Harrison was 27 years old and had come to Wyoming 5 years ago from Texas with his younger brother, Daniel. They had bought the ranch with money they had saved from years of working cattle drives and had been building it up slowly but steadily ever since. Harrison was quiet and serious, but had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He was also, she realized with a mixture of delight and terror, one of the most attractive men she had ever met. It was not just his looks, though those were certainly appealing. It was the way he moved, confident and capable. It was the way he treated his animals, firm but gentle. It was the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, like she was something precious and rare. It made her heart race and her palms sweat, and she found herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the day. She tried to tell herself that it was just gratitude, that she was confusing appreciation for his kindness with something deeper. But as October arrived and the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Rebecca had to admit the truth. She was falling in love with Harrison Owens, and she had no idea what to do about it. The problem was that she had no idea if he felt the same way. He was always kind to her, always considerate, but he never crossed the line into anything more intimate. He never touched her unless it was necessary, never said anything that could be construed as romantic. Sometimes, she caught him looking at her with an expression that made her think he might feel something, but then he would look away and the moment would pass. She told herself it was for the best. She was living in his house, dependent on his charity, and any relationship between them would be complicated at best and disastrous at worst. But knowing that did not stop her heart from aching every time he smiled at her, or her breath from catching when their hands accidentally touched while working. It all came to a head on a cool October evening when they were sitting by the fire after supper. Harrison was reading from a book of poetry, something by Walt Whitman, and his deep voice gave the words a richness that made Rebecca's chest tight. When he finished the poem, he looked up and found her staring at him, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "Rebecca," Harrison said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "All right," she said, her heart suddenly pounding. "I know I said you could stay here as long as you needed, and I meant that. But I need you to know that it has gotten harder and harder for me to keep things casual between us." He set the book aside and leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "I care about you, Rebecca. More than I should, probably. More than is smart given the situation. And if you do not feel the same way, I need you to tell me now so I can get a handle on this before it becomes a problem." Rebecca could hardly believe what she was hearing. All this time, she had been convinced he saw her as nothing more than a responsibility, someone he was helping out of the goodness of his heart. The idea that he had been struggling with the same feelings she had been was almost too much to process. "You care about me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," Harrison said simply. "A lot. I think I started caring about you the moment I saw you standing in the rain looking lost and alone, and every day since then I have cared about you more. But I do not want to pressure you or make you feel like you owe me anything. You do not. Whatever you feel or do not feel, your place here is secure. I need you to know that." Rebecca stood up, her legs shaking, and crossed to where he sat. She reached out and took his hand, marveling at how large and warm it was, how right it felt in hers. "I care about you too," she said, her voice stronger now. "I have been trying not to because I did not think you felt the same way and I did not want to make things awkward. But I do, Harrison. I care about you so much it scares me sometimes." The smile that spread across Harrison's face was like nothing she had ever seen before, pure joy and relief mixed with something that looked a lot like love. He stood up, still holding her hand, and with his free hand, he reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low and careful. "Please," Rebecca said, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss started gentle, almost tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. But then Rebecca's arms came up around his neck, and Harrison's hands found her waist, and suddenly the kiss deepened, became more urgent. It was like a dam breaking, all the emotion they had been holding back for weeks flooding out at once. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Rebecca's cheeks were flushed. Harrison rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, a smile playing at his lips. "I have wanted to do that for so long," he said quietly. "Me too," Rebecca admitted, laughing a little at the absurdity of it all. "We are both terrible at this." "Absolutely awful," Harrison agreed, but he was smiling, and so was she. From that night on, everything changed. They were still careful, still mindful of propriety, but there was no more pretending that they were just two people sharing a house. They were courting, officially, and it felt right in a way that nothing else in Rebecca's life had felt in a very long time. Harrison was a wonderful suitor, attentive and thoughtful without being overbearing. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow and took her riding through the mountains to see the fall colors. He taught her to shoot his rifle and laughed when she turned out to be a better shot than he was. He held her hand when they sat by the fire and kissed her good night every evening before she went to her room, always respectful, always stopping before things went too far. Rebecca fell more in love with him every day. She loved his quiet strength and his dry humor. She loved the way he talked to his horses, and the way he remembered little details about things she had told him. She loved how safe she felt with him, how valued, how seen. For the first time since her parents had died, she felt like she had a home again, not just a place to live, but a real home with someone who cared about her. Daniel came back from Montana in early November, driving a small herd of cattle ahead of him. He was 24, 3 years younger than Harrison, with the same dark eyes but a more easygoing manner. Rebecca had been nervous about meeting him, worried that he might resent her presence or disapprove of her relationship with his brother, but Daniel turned out to be friendly and welcoming. "So you are the woman who has my brother walking around with that ridiculous grin on his face," Daniel said the first night, shaking her hand warmly. "I have to say, it is a good look on him. He has been way too serious for way too long." "Daniel," Harrison said warningly, but he was smiling. "What? I am just saying it is nice to see you happy," Daniel said, then turned back to Rebecca. "He told me about the flood and everything you have been through. I am real sorry about that, but I am glad you ended up here. This place has needed a woman's touch for a long time." Rebecca liked Daniel immediately. He had an easy charm that balanced Harrison's more reserved nature, and watching the two brothers together, she could see the deep affection and respect they had for each other. With Daniel back, the ranch ran even more smoothly, and Rebecca found herself with more time to focus on the domestic side of things, which suited her just fine. As winter approached, Harrison started talking about the future in a way that made Rebecca's heart sing. He talked about expanding the herd next spring, about building a bigger barn, about all the things they could do with the ranch. And he always said, "We, not I," like he had already accepted that she would be there, that they would be building this life together. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, Harrison asked her to marry him. There was no ring, not yet, but he got down on one knee in front of the fire and took her hand, and told her that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life making her happy if she would let him. Rebecca said yes before he even finished the question, tears streaming down her face, and he swept her up in his arms and kissed her until they were both dizzy. Daniel whooped from across the room and immediately broke out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion, and they stayed up late into the night celebrating and making plans. They were married in January of 1879, in a simple ceremony in Kingston with Daniel, and a few neighbors as witnesses. Rebecca wore a dress that she had sewn herself from fabric Harrison had bought her for Christmas, a simple but pretty design in deep blue that brought out her eyes. Harrison wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous, and when he saw her walking toward him, the expression on his face made her want to cry all over again. The minister, a kind old man named Reverend Thomas, kept the ceremony short and sweet, and when he pronounced them husband and wife and Harrison kissed her, Rebecca felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This man, this wonderful, kind, solid man, was hers now, and she was his, and they were going to build a life together. The wedding night was both terrifying and wonderful. Harrison was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she was comfortable, and when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, now their bed, and talked until dawn about everything and nothing, their voices soft in the darkness. The winter was hard, as winters in Wyoming always were, but Rebecca had never been happier. She loved being Harrison's wife, loved sharing his bed and his life. They fell into a rhythm, working together during the day and holding each other at night, and Rebecca felt like she had finally found where she belonged. Spring came early that year, and with it, new beginnings. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Harrison and Daniel worked the cattle and horses while Rebecca managed the house and the garden and the chickens. She also started selling eggs and butter in town again, building up a nice little side income that she saved carefully. In late March, Rebecca realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She did not say anything to Harrison at first, not wanting to get his hopes up, but when she missed a third time and started feeling sick in the mornings, she knew. She was pregnant. She told Harrison one evening after supper, her hands shaking as she took his and placed them on her still flat stomach. For a moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable, and she started to worry that maybe he was not ready for this. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop that probably scared the horses, and he picked her up and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing and begging him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, over and over, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." Daniel was nearly as excited as Harrison, already planning all the things he was going to teach his nephew or niece. Rebecca found their enthusiasm endearing and slightly overwhelming. She had always wanted children, but now that it was actually happening, she felt a mix of joy and terror. What if something went wrong? What if she was not a good mother? What if the baby did not survive? Harrison seemed to sense her fears because he sat her down one night and took her hands in his. "I know you are scared," he said gently. "I am scared too, but we are going to get through this together just like we have gotten through everything else. You are strong, Rebecca. You are a survivor. And you are going to be an amazing mother." His confidence in her made her feel braver, and as the months passed and her belly grew, she found herself getting excited about the baby. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, and Harrison built a beautiful cradle out of oak, carving little stars into the headboard. They argued good-naturedly about names, Harrison favoring traditional family names while Rebecca wanted something more unique. The baby came in early December, about a week before Christmas. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Rebecca was sure she was going to die. But Harrison never left her side, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and telling her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. When the baby finally arrived, letting out a lusty cry that filled the room, Rebecca felt a rush of love so intense it was almost painful. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Carson from Kingston, cleaned the baby up and wrapped it in a blanket before placing it in Rebecca's arms. "It is a boy," she announced with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Rebecca looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face and his little fists waving in the air, and started to cry. Harrison sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, and together they stared at this little person they had created, this miracle. "Hello, little one," Harrison said softly, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek with one finger. "Welcome to the world." They named him Henry, after Harrison's father, with Owen as a middle name. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he had his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Harrison was completely besotted with him, spending every free moment holding him or playing with him. And Rebecca fell even more in love with her husband watching him be a father. Daniel was an excellent uncle, always willing to watch Henry when Harrison and Rebecca needed some time alone, and he doted on the boy shamelessly. The ranch continued to prosper, and by the time Henry was a year old, they had expanded significantly, adding more land and more livestock, and hiring a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. Life was not perfect. There were hard times, like the winter when half the cattle died in a blizzard, or the summer when Henry got sick with a fever that lasted for days and terrified them all. But through it all, Rebecca and Harrison faced everything together, their love for each other and their family giving them strength. When Henry was 3, Rebecca got pregnant again. This time, she was less scared and more excited, knowing what to expect. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1883, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Rose, after Rebecca's mother. Rose had her mother's auburn hair and her father's smile, and Henry was immediately protective of his little sister, following her around like a devoted shadow. The years passed quickly, full of joy and hard work, and the everyday challenges of raising a family and running a ranch. Harrison's hair started to show threads of silver at the temples, and Rebecca developed laugh lines around her eyes. They grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. When Henry was 10 and Rose was 7, Rebecca found out she was pregnant one more time. This pregnancy was harder on her body, which was older now and had been through 2 previous births. But when their second daughter, Margaret, was born in the fall of 1890, Rebecca felt the same overwhelming rush of love she had felt with the first 2. Margaret was a surprise in every way, with blonde hair that came from some ancestor neither of them could quite place, and a personality that was fearless and adventurous from the start. She kept them all on their toes, climbing trees and chasing cattle, and generally refusing to behave the way a proper young lady was supposed to. By the time Margaret was 5, Henry was 15 and already as tall as his father, working the ranch like a man and talking about the future. Rose was 12, beautiful and clever, with a talent for drawing that had everyone in the family amazed. They were good kids, respectful and kind, and Rebecca knew that she and Harrison had done something right. On a warm summer evening in 1895, Rebecca sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Harrison sat beside her in the rocking chair he had built last winter, his hand in hers, their fingers intertwined. From inside the house, she could hear the sounds of their children, Henry helping Rose with her homework while Margaret regaled them with some long, elaborate story about the frog she had caught that afternoon. "Can you believe it has been 17 years?" Rebecca asked quietly, leaning her head on Harrison's shoulder. "Since the flood?" Harrison asked. "Since you found me in the rain and brought me here," Rebecca said. "Since you opened your door and told me this was mine now." Harrison was quiet for a moment, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Best decision I ever made," he finally said. "Though to be fair, I think it was less of a decision and more of a certainty. The moment I saw you standing there, looking so lost and so brave at the same time, I knew you were supposed to be here. With me. I felt it too, Rebecca admitted. Even though I was terrified and had just lost everything, when you looked at me, I felt safe. I felt like maybe everything was going to be all right after all. And was it? Harrison asked, though there was a smile in his voice that suggested he already knew the answer. It was better than all right, Rebecca said, lifting her head to look at him. It was perfect. You are perfect. This life we built together is perfect. Well, I do not know about perfect, Harrison said with a laugh. Remember when Henry was 5 and decided to ride that stallion by himself and broke his arm? Or when Rose was 8 and tried to cook supper and nearly burned down the kitchen? Or last week when Margaret brought that snake into the house? Perfectly imperfect then, Rebecca amended with a smile. But ours. All ours. Harrison leaned over and kissed her soft and sweet, the kind of kiss that spoke of years of love and commitment and partnership. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers, just like he had that first night when they had admitted their feelings to each other. I love you, Rebecca Owens, he said quietly. More now than I did 17 years ago, which I did not think was possible. I love you too, Harrison Owens, Rebecca said, her heart full to bursting. Thank you for finding me in that storm. Thank you for bringing me home. You brought yourself home, Harrison said. I just had the good sense to recognize it when you arrived. They sat together on the porch as the sun finished setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and purple. Inside the house, their children laughed and argued and lived, the sounds of a family that was whole and happy and secure. Around them, the ranch that they had built together with their own hands stretched out in all directions, a testament to hard work and love and faith in each other. The flood had taken away Rebecca's first home, had swept away everything she thought she knew about her life and her future. But in its place, she had found something so much better. She had found Harrison, and together they had built not just a house but a home, not just a family but a legacy. As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear in the sky, Rebecca squeezed Harrison's hand and felt him squeeze back, a silent communication that needed no words. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. They had faced loss and hardship and fear, and they had come through it all stronger and more united than ever. Daniel came out onto the porch then, carrying baby Margaret, who had apparently fallen asleep during her story. At 39, Daniel had never married, claiming that he was too set in his ways and too fond of his freedom. But Rebecca suspected it was more that he had never met anyone who made him want to give up that freedom. He was devoted to his brother's family, though, the best uncle any child could ask for. This one is out cold, Daniel said with a grin, carefully transferring Margaret into Harrison's arms. I am going to head into town for a bit, check on the new shipment at the feed store. I will be back before midnight. Be safe, Harrison said, his voice automatically taking on the protective older brother tone that it always did when Daniel went anywhere. Always am, Daniel said with a wink, then headed down the steps toward the barn where his horse was already saddled and waiting. Rebecca watched him go, then looked down at Margaret sleeping peacefully in Harrison's arms, her blonde hair curled against her round cheek, her little hand fisted in her father's shirt. Harrison was looking at their daughter with such love and tenderness that Rebecca felt her throat tighten with emotion. She is growing so fast, Harrison said quietly. They all are. Sometimes I look at Henry and cannot believe he is the same tiny baby you placed in my arms 15 years ago. I know, Rebecca said. It goes too quickly. I wish I could slow it down somehow, keep them small and safe forever. They will always be safe, Harrison said firmly. We will make sure of that, but we have to let them grow, let them find their own paths. That is what good parents do." "When did you get so wise?" Rebecca teased gently. "I have a good teacher," Harrison said, looking at her with such open affection that it made her blush even after all these years of marriage. They stayed on the porch a little while longer, until the evening chill drove them inside. Harrison carried Margaret to her room and tucked her into bed while Rebecca checked on Henry and Rose, making sure they had finished their homework and were ready for bed. Then, finally, she and Harrison retreated to their own room, the one they had shared for 17 years. As Rebecca got ready for bed, brushing out her long hair that was now streaked with threads of silver, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked older. There was no denying that. There were lines on her face that had not been there when she was 22, and her figure had changed after 3 children. But when she looked at herself, she did not see loss or aging. She saw a woman who had lived and loved and survived. She saw a woman who had built a good life from the ashes of disaster. Harrison came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different my life turned out from what I expected," Rebecca said honestly. "When I was standing on that ridge watching my house get swept away, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything that mattered, but I was wrong. I had not lost everything. I had just lost everything I thought I needed. What I actually needed was still waiting for me." "Me?" Harrison asked with a small smile. "You," Rebecca confirmed, turning in his arms to face him. "And this place and our family and this whole beautiful life we built together. None of it would have happened if the flood had not taken my first home away. I mourned it at the time, and I still think about it sometimes, but I cannot regret it. Not when it led me here." Harrison kissed her forehead, a gesture of affection that he had done thousands of times over the years, but that never failed to make her feel cherished. "I think about that day all the time," he admitted. "I think about how easily I could have taken a different route home, how I could have missed seeing you entirely. What if I had been 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later? What if I had decided to stay in town that night instead of coming back? We would have missed each other completely, and I cannot even imagine what my life would look like without you in it." "Quieter, probably," Rebecca said with a laugh. "Less chaotic, definitely cleaner." "Emptier," Harrison said seriously. "So much emptier. You filled up all the spaces in my life I did not even know were empty. You made this house a home. You gave me children and love and purpose beyond just running a ranch. You gave me everything, Rebecca." "We gave each other everything," Rebecca corrected gently. "You saved me that day, Harrison, but I think maybe I saved you too. We saved each other." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the lamplight, 2 people who had found each other in the midst of disaster and built something beautiful and lasting. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, but inside, everything was warm and safe and right. They climbed into bed together, Harrison pulling Rebecca close against his chest the way he did every night, and within minutes, she could feel him starting to drift off to sleep. She stayed awake a little longer, listening to his steady breathing and the familiar sounds of the house settling around them, feeling grateful for every single moment that had led her to this place. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Henry grew up strong and capable, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Harrison's back started to trouble him, and the hard physical labor became more difficult. When Henry was 21, he married a sweet girl named Anna from Kingston, and they built a house on the far side of the property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough to have their own space. Rose pursued her art, eventually getting some of her drawings published in a Denver newspaper, something that made the whole family immensely proud. She married a schoolteacher when she was 22, a kind man named Peter who appreciated her creativity and intelligence, and they moved to Cheyenne, where Peter had gotten a position at a prestigious school. Margaret, true to her adventurous nature, shocked everyone by announcing at 18 that she wanted to train as a nurse. It was an unconventional choice, but Harrison and Rebecca supported her, having learned long ago that trying to force Margaret into a mold she did not fit was an exercise in futility. She went off to nursing school in 1903, writing long letters home about her studies and the interesting people she was meeting. By 1905, Harrison and Rebecca were in their 50s, officially middle-aged, with Henry and Anna running most of the ranch operations. They had given Rebecca and Harrison 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl who visited often and kept them young. Daniel, now 52 and still unmarried, had built his own cabin on the property and spent his days working with Henry and spoiling his great-nieces and nephews. On a crisp fall afternoon, Rebecca was working in the garden, pulling up the last of the vegetables before the first hard frost, when Harrison came and sat on the bench nearby. He had been moving more slowly lately, his joints bothering him more in the cold weather, but his mind was as sharp as ever and his eyes still held the same warmth they had when he was 27. "You remember the day we met?" he asked suddenly. Rebecca looked up from the carrots she was harvesting and smiled. "Of course I do. How could I forget? I was standing in the rain, covered in mud, having just lost everything I owned, and you rode up like some kind of rescuer from a storybook." "You did not look like you needed rescuing," Harrison said thoughtfully. "You looked like you were about to rescue yourself and just had not quite figured out how yet." "I felt like I was drowning," Rebecca admitted, sitting back on her heels. "Not in the floodwater, but in despair and fear and uncertainty. I did not know what I was going to do or how I was going to survive. And then I brought you home," Harrison said. "And then you brought me home," Rebecca echoed. "You opened your door and said this was mine now. At the time, I thought you just meant the house, a place to stay until I got back on my feet. But you meant so much more than that, did you not?" "I meant everything," Harrison said simply. "I did not realize it at the time, but from the moment I saw you, some part of me knew that you were supposed to be here. That this place, this life, was supposed to be yours. Ours." Rebecca stood up, brushing the dirt off her hands, and went to sit beside him on the bench. She took his weathered hand in hers, their fingers fitting together as perfectly as they had 27 years ago. "You gave me more than a home," she said quietly. "You gave me a future when I thought I did not have one. You gave me love and family and purpose. You gave me everything I did not even know I needed." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Harrison said, lifting their joined hands to kiss her knuckles. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca Owens. The very best thing." They sat together in the fading afternoon light, 2 people who had loved each other through decades of life's ups and downs, who had built a legacy together that would continue long after they were gone. Around them, the ranch hummed with activity. They could hear Henry working with the horses in the near pasture, could see the smoke rising from Anna's kitchen chimney where she was probably making supper, could hear the distant laughter of their grandchildren playing in the yard. "We did all right, did we not?" Rebecca asked, leaning her head on Harrison's shoulder. "We did better than all right," Harrison said firmly. "We did great. Look at what we built, Rebecca. Look at our children and grandchildren. Look at this ranch. Look at the life we created. We took disaster and turned it into something beautiful." "The flood took my home away," Rebecca said softly, echoing thoughts she had had many times over the years. "But it brought me here, to you, to this life. I lost one home and found another that was so much better, so much richer and fuller. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for that. You have thanked me every day for 27 years, Harrison said. Every morning when I wake up and you are beside me, every evening when we sit together by the fire, every moment of this life we have built together. That is all the thanks I need. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Rebecca felt a sense of peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned when she was a young woman. It had been harder in some ways, easier in others, and completely unexpected in every way that mattered. But it was hers. This life, this love, this family, this home, all of it was hers, and she would not change a single thing, not even the flood that had seemed like such a catastrophe at the time. Because that flood had not just taken away her old home. It had brought her to her real home, the one she was meant to find all along. Harrison helped her up from the bench as the evening chill set in, and they walked back to the house together, still holding hands after all these years. Inside, they could hear Anna calling the grandchildren to supper, and the warm glow of lamplight spilled out through the windows, welcoming them home. Rebecca paused at the door, looking back at the ranch spread out before them in the twilight, and Harrison paused with her, understanding without words what she was thinking. "This is yours now," he said softly, repeating the words he had spoken so long ago. "It always has been." "Ours," Rebecca corrected, squeezing his hand. "It has always been ours." They went inside together, into the warmth and light and love, into the home they had built from nothing but hope and hard work and faith in each other. And as the door closed behind them, Rebecca felt nothing but gratitude for the flood that had taken her old life away and the cowboy who had opened his door and given her a new one.